Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to today's program, Financial Empowerment for Women in Law, sponsored by the Women in Law section and the Committee on Continuing Legal Education of the New York State Bar Association. Today's program will run from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And during the course of today's program, if you would like to pose a question to today's panel, please feel free to use the chat tab in the Zoom portal. And as one of our speakers, Morgan Richardson, mentioned earlier, this is set up in a meeting format, so please also feel free to turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and ask this question to today's panelists. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to the chair of the annual meeting and programming committee of the Women in Law section, Laura Sulam, for some opening remarks. Laura?
Thanks, Ernesto. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Laura Sulam. As Ernesto mentioned, I chair the Women in Law section's annual meeting and programming committee, and I'm also a senior director at Practical Law, which is a Thomson Reuters company. Before we dive into today's program, I would like to say just a few words about the Women in Law section. So our section has over 1,000 members, and we are really dedicated to addressing critical issues that impact women attorneys and women in general. We are always looking to increase our membership, and we welcome women and men attorneys to our section. So please do reach out to us if you would like to join. As a member, you can participate as much or as little as you like. If you are interested in further developing leadership and speaking skills, you can join one of our committees, such as the Annual Meeting and Programming Committee, which organized this program and helps organize other CLE and non-CLE events, as well as our annual meeting each January and our Women on the Move program each fall. We have a Champions Committee, which engages men as partners to advance women in the profession and the association and in society at large. And we have a Legislative Affairs Committee, which drafts memos in support or opposition to proposed New York State legislation that affects women. These are only 3 of our 17 different committees, and we really welcome your participation and ideas and help for events and other activities. Also, please check out Wills Connect, which is our section's newsletter, and it's available on the NYSBA website. Our new issue is dropping very soon. If you are interested in writing for Wills Connect, we welcome your submissions, so please reach out to us. You can also follow the Women in Law section and receive updates on the NYSBA website. Finally, I would like to mention our upcoming events and invite you to join them. On October 17th at 6:30 p.m., we have our virtual book club meeting, and this month we're discussing The Empty Kayak by Jody Millman. On October 18th at 1 p.m. is our annual Women on the Move program, the theme of which is navigating the path to your success. This will be a terrific program, and it offers 3.5 CLE credits, including ethics credits. Also, sponsorship opportunities are available, so please reach out to me or any member of the Women in Law section if your organization is interested in sponsoring. On October 20th at 9 a.m., the Women in Law section is co-sponsoring a free event on cultural responsiveness in domestic violence services at Albany Law School. And this event will also be live streamed via Zoom. And finally, on November 14th at 7:30 p.m., we are co-sponsoring an event with Gloria J. Brown Marshall, who will discuss her book, She Took Justice, with former NYSBA president Henry M. Greenberg at the NYSBA building in Albany. And you can register for these programs on the NYSBA website. So with that introduction, I will now introduce our terrific panel. Niraj Chabra is the managing director of Sidebar Advisors and brings over 17 years of financial expertise to the legal profession. Prior to founding Sidebar Advisors in 2022, he excelled as an advisor with Ameriprise Financial, catering to clients within the legal field. Niraj's core areas of concentration encompass family finances, tax and estate strategies, retirement planning, and personalized solutions for small businesses. His mission is to empower attorneys in navigating their distinctive tax challenges and adapting their financial plans as their careers evolve. Morgan Richardson is a partner and co-chair of Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogan's matrimonial and family law practice, As a litigator, consultant, and mediator, Morgan utilizes a holistic approach to zealously advocate for her clients' needs in their most challenging times. Relying on past commercial litigation experience, Morgan counsels clients through complex divorce, mediations, custody matters, and other family disputes. She is a professor at Pace Law School, where she teaches courses about modern family law issues. Morgan also blogs about her unique experience and perspective on the divorce artist and is often quoted by media outlets. She authors articles on divorce for publications including the Huffington Post and Good Men's Project. Rosanna Roizen is a partner in Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogan's Trust and Estates practice. Rosanna focuses her practice in the areas of elder care, special needs, and traditional trusts and estates planning. Through a detailed and compassionate approach, Rosanna works to ensure that her clients are empowered in their needs by understanding their options on planning their family's future. She is on the Part 36 fiduciary list in New York City and is often appointed by New York City judges in Article 81 guardianship matters as either counsel to guardian, attorney for alleged incapacitated person, court evaluator, or temporary or permanent guardian. She has been recognized for her community service, receiving a proclamation from City Councilman Mark Traeger and Chaim Deutsch in 2018, and a commendation from New York City Comptroller John Seedlew in 2013. Additional information about our expert panels and all of their experience is available in their bios, all of which are included in the course materials on your learning dashboard on the NYSBA website. And with that, I will turn things over to Niraj. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for everybody who helped organize this particular discussion. It is actually one of my favorite CLEs that we teach. So it's personal to me, and it's a lot of good information, and I hope you all get a lot of value out of it. Hopefully everybody could see my screen. Nothing yet. Where is it? Let's see. Screen one. Can you see it?
It was up before, Niraj, and yep, looks like it's good now.
Good. You're seeing the PowerPoint?
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, so I guess the first thing I like to start off with is asking the question, why do we need a presentation on financial planning for women? You know, shouldn't numbers be numbers and tax strategy be tax strategy, and, you know, laws are laws, etc. What are your thoughts? As Laura mentioned, you know, this is intended, and Morgan mentioned that intended to be an interactive discussion. So feel free to. Anybody have thoughts as to what's different in terms of financial planning between men and women? Neva?
Hi. There's two big factors that I see, especially as a women in law section member. One is that women still historically as a group earn less than men. And the other is just lifetime statistics. Women that are in partnerships of long duration, whether they're marriage or otherwise, if women tend to live longer than men. And so if you're in a heterosexual partnership, the likelihood of outliving your partner who has likely been earning more than you is going to leave you the last one standing. And that doesn't even get into what our panelists are dealing with, which is the dissolution of partnerships prior to death of one of the partners. So for these three big reasons, at least one, and likely at least two of which are going to affect all of us, women need to be involved in planning and involved in real ownership of their own knowledge of their finances.
Very good. Yeah. You know, the pay disparity is one that usually comes front of mind and people pick up right away, but the one that's less obvious is some of the side effects of living longer, you know, and we're definitely going to talk about that in more detail. So thank you, Neva. So absolutely, you know, one of the key differences is going to be income disparity, which Morgan is going to get into in much more detail. Neva, you got 2 out of 3 with living longer for women. And the third one is, again, maybe not so obvious. Women just wear more hats in terms of, you know, their day-to-day finances. So a good example will be, you know, on this call, I'm willing to bet most of you are the primary breadwinner in your household. But if you think about who packed your kids' lunches, it was probably still you, even despite being the primary earner. So women just have more on their plate, and this impacts, overall finances in a couple of different ways that, again, may not be intentional. So let's start by talking about the income disparity.
Right. So, yes, absolutely. There is a huge income disparity still, even in 2023. We're looking at women being paid approximately 81 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And only 54% of women have put aside any significant money for retirement. On average, they will have 42% less in retirement income than the equivalent man at the age of retirement. And I just wanted to mention again real fast that the Women on the Move CLE that's coming up on, I believe was the 18th. Yes, it's on the 18th from 1 to 5. It's also going to be addressing sort of these similar issues, navigating the path to your success. There is going to be a panel on overcoming gender bias along that path to success, and that addresses directly these pay gap issues. Moving on to the next slide. So what is the gender gap negotiation? It may sort of in part explain part of this continued pay gap if we're looking at how negotiations might be handled differently when we look across different genders in terms of how they're negotiating their pay. And that's what this slide sort of goes to set out. I don't know if anyone has anything to add about this point, but I thought that it was a very interesting point because it may be that, women just aren't coming from a place of effectively negotiating, but I don't know that that's the only thing that's happening here.
Yeah, there's two things happening, if you don't mind me adding, Morgan. Number one,
Yeah.
is exactly what you said. Women unfortunately just not coming to the table to negotiate as much as men are, even though employers or anybody really is expecting you to come to the table to negotiate. So that's the first thing. The second thing that is a positive is that the income gap is shrinking as more and more women enter the workforce. We think, based on the stats, it's attributable to the younger women entering the workforce. They're just more inclined to negotiate. Obviously, the data is speculative, but as more and more women are entering the workforce and are negotiating a little bit more, it's starting to shrink the gap, not to the degree that we want it to, but it is moving in the right direction.
I also think what's really incredible here is how are we approaching this knowledge? We know that there's this pay gap, and I don't know about anyone here, but I'm on a number of Facebook groups with different lawyers who are also mothers. And on one of them, we have been exchanging anonymously through the anonymous post feature our different respective roles and salaries and benefits and bonuses, all of that. So having access to that kind of information, you can then take those tools. So talk with your friends, get that information so that you have that at the ready to negotiate on and advocate for yourself. So moving on to the next slide. Uh-oh, Niraj, I think I just lost your slides.
Oh, why is that? Let's see.
Sure.
One.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, cut off on my end.
So it's clear that this problem becomes even worse when we look at comparing across different racial divides. And then the numbers just become very drastic. Hispanic women earning only 58.4% of what a white male would earn in a similar position. Black women at 63.1%, and then white women at 79.6%. So we can see that it is having an impact on different women from different backgrounds. And this also, I just wanted to wrap up these points with something that hopefully everyone is aware of. The ERA is going to be up for a constitutional vote in New York next year. So make sure you're keeping tabs on that.
So keep in mind that negotiation does not simply have to mean dollars and cents. It could mean getting access to certain benefits. It could mean making sure that so for example, maybe there are certain partners at your firm that have access to a retirement plan that you may or may not have access to. So it could mean negotiating things of that nature. It could mean flex time and working around your schedule. So there's a lot of different ways to negotiate, but typically when we're doing financial planning with our clients, one of the key things that I always ask is, are they planning on starting or expanding a family? What's right around the corner? It's October, and now's the time that you're going to get those benefits booklets, and you have to check which options you're taking on. If you're thinking about starting a family or, again, expanding a family, even if it's not today, but it's going to be sometime in the future, maybe it's time to go from the bronze to the silver or the silver to the gold plan in order to take into consideration you're going to have these additional medical expenses, hospital visits, things of that nature. So good time to evaluate those things and just understanding your employer benefits. There's a lot of hidden gems. People are typically comfortable to a certain degree with their 401k, but as attorneys, you might have access to something like a deferred compensation program and things of that nature. That's important for you to understand, because literally translate to tens of thousands of dollars a year in tax savings alone. So just understanding is going to be a key component to making sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. So let's take a quick poll. By a show of hands, raise your virtual hands. Compared to men, who do you think is the better investor, men or women? This is always an interesting question to ask. Raise your hands if you think it is men. Can anybody see the raised hands? No, I don't see
I
any.
see one. I see one raised hand. Thanks,
For
Sarah.
men? Okay.
Oh, two. I see two raised hands.
Raise hands for men. All right, let's put your hands down and see how many people think women are the better investor. Going up a little bit quicker.
I might be biased.
Yeah, right. Split house though. It's actually women. So as Laura pointed out, I spent a majority of my career at Ameriprise Financial, and when I first started out, we were, Ameriprise did a lot of research on the topic, dumped a lot of money on it as well, and they basically taught us, yeah, women tend to be more conservative with their investments, and as such, make sure that you're presenting more conservative investments as opposed to something too aggressive. Obviously, these are general rules of thumb, and it doesn't necessarily mean all women or anything like that, but turns out it was also not the full story. It turns out that women were comfortable taking on the same level of risk as men. But what was different? Women just wanted to have a clear understanding of their option. They wanted to, make sure that they know what they're doing and understand their options in front of them. Men tend to be a little bit more shoot from the hip. Again, we're generalizing, but women want to dive deeper into their investments. Now, here's the catch. As Neva pointed out earlier, do women have the time? You're going to have a line. I see the discussions, Robin was talking about, leaving the workforce. Why are women leaving the workforce at a rate of 4 times the rate of men? Because they're taking care of family, because they're more likely to be caregivers. Who has time to invest the performance of mutual fund A versus mutual fund B? So all these reasons, it turns out that women are actually the better investors and invest more appropriately. The challenge is finding the time between juggling your family, juggling your career, et cetera, to make the time for this research. So Neva also pointed out about longevity. This does have a major impact because on average, women are going to live about 8 years longer than men. If you're in a same-sex relationship, what does this mean for you? This means that, both spouses are probably going to have higher medical expenses in the long run because of living longer. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, there's a better chance that women are going to outlive their spouses. It's not uncommon in the baby booming generation for men to have been 10 years older than their female spouse. You couple that with 5 years longer for longevity. It's not unusual for women to substantially outlive their spouses and live off of one Social Security, more likely to be responsible for executing the will and things of that nature. So how do we address these longevity concerns? This is a don't shoot the messenger type of conversation, but it starts off by saving more money. putting more money into your 401k for a longer retirement. Now, here's the challenge, because as Robin pointed out, more women leave the workforce. Where do we get the resources to save more money? Consider investing a little bit more aggressively. I'm not saying because women are more conservative investors, but because of the fact that we have more time on our side. Whenever you read these general rules of thumb about investing, they don't take gender into consideration. If we know that we have a 5-year longer runway, maybe we have to dial up the ratchet a little bit and invest just slightly more aggressive than we would otherwise to account for that and make sure that we're making up for that growth. Women are more likely to use long-term care insurance, so it's a better consideration or more meaningful consideration for women. You see that 2/3 of the attendees at nursing home facilities are going to be women, so more likely to use it. So therefore, and if you think about it, if you do have a heterosexual relationship, and we talked about the husband being older, what happens if he passes away? When he needed the care, the wife was taking care of him, but when he passes away, who's taking care of the spouse, So for all these reasons, it's an important consideration. Delaying retirement, again, don't kill the messenger. This is significantly easier for people in the legal profession because I feel like they just tend to work a little bit longer, but keep in mind that it doesn't mean to work to the same degree that you were as a first, second, third year associate. It could mean being selective on the cases that you take on. It could mean reducing the number of hours you work. But by delaying Social Security, it's going to have a significant multiplier effect. What's happening? Number one, you're not dipping into your 401k for those extra years because your income is typically sufficient to sustain your lifestyle. Number two, your Social Security is continuing to grow because you delayed. And number three, so are your investments. You're continuing to put money into your 401k and you're getting a couple extra years of additional growth. So even at $500,000 investment in your portfolio at 5%, that's an extra $25,000 a year. So it adds up pretty quickly, ignoring contributions. So as I said, we're going to get into more detail later on this topic, but delaying Social Security might be a better option for a lot of people. So typically the two factors that we take into consideration are going to be, does longevity run in your family and who's the primary earner? So again, most of you are probably the higher earner in your household. So there's, a check for that one. And the fact that women tend to live longer, there's another check. There's a good chance that when we're coming up with a Social Security strategy, delaying is probably going to make more sense. And Rosanna's going to talk about this in a few minutes, but just plan for higher medical expenses. It's significantly more for women than it is for men. So we just want to make sure that we take that into consideration. So how do we go about, saving more money? So the first thing is to pay yourself first. Most of the time, what we find, and, I'm sure that there's plenty of people on this call that are doing it this way. It doesn't mean it's wrong. What we typically find is that people have their entire paycheck directly deposited into their checking account, and then they have a fixed dollar amount going into their savings every month. I usually reverse this. I tell everybody deposit your whole paycheck into your savings, and then have a fixed dollar amount going into your checking account, enough to cover your monthly expenses. Why do we do it this way? Few reasons. Anybody know what today is? What holiday? Raise your hand if you do. Or unmute yourself. Today is the start of Amazon Prime Day. So what happens when people see a higher balance in their checking account? They naturally spend more money. I was up last night. Okay, we need to, invest in a sound system. So let me check Amazon Prime Day if there's going to be any deals, etc. So it's human nature to spend more money when you see more money in your checking account. Now, what do we know is right around the corner? The holidays, right? So there's a good chance, even though you spent less money in the last couple of months because things are slowing down from the summer activities, that it's going to ramp right back up. So by putting just enough into the checking account, you're forcing yourself to save more money. The other reason that we do this is it helps you avoid trying to keep up with the Jones. So when you get your annual raise, what ends up happening? You get more money in your paycheck. You're putting more money into your checking account, but your savings stayed flat, because you have a fixed dollar amount going into your savings. By reversing this, that extra disposable income just sits in your checking account and it's in your savings account, and it's going to be there for when you need it in the future. So for all these reasons, we typically recommend that you pay yourself first and put the money directly into the savings account. Creating an annual budget instead of a monthly budget is also important. If I were to take a poll today and ask everybody, walk me through your expenses, you're probably going to give me your mortgage, your student loans, your utilities, food and groceries, etc. But how many people remember how much they spent on the holidays last year? How much you spent on Broadway shows? You might be paying your vacation bill now. That might be the only reason you know how much you spent on travel. But did you spend money on an anniversary gift? The example I like to give is I live in New Jersey. I'm about an hour away from Connecticut, and I had a destination wedding in Connecticut to go to. And during this wedding, I was a groomsman. That meant that I had to get a tux. My wife was a bridesmaid. That meant she had to get a dress. Our kid was 2 years old at the time, so we both had to go to the rehearsal dinner, and it didn't make sense for us to commute back and forth, so we got a hotel. Oh, by the way, we had to give a gift. So this wedding cost us a couple $1,000s, you know? When you start to add all of these different expenses that may not come up every month, but do come up throughout the year, we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's important to make sure that you're coming up with an annual budget. Otherwise, you're just going to derail yourself. You get a tax refund, you get a major settlement, etc. Pretend it's not there. Just try to bank it wherever possible. So let's kind of shift gears for a second and talk about life insurance needs and how to go about calculating this. I'm going to use myself as an example. When I'm young and single and nobody's really depending on me from a financial perspective, what's my need for life insurance? Probably nothing. Along the way, I get married, and for illustrative purposes, let's assume I'm the primary breadwinner. I want to make sure my spouse is taken care of, and if we get a house, I want to make sure she doesn't have to worry about the mortgage. Then we decided to start a family, and now we have to think about college, we have to think about daycare, we have to think about activities, we have to think about everything that goes, Pampers, that comes along with raising a child. The peak of your life insurance needs is going to be after the birth of your last child. So why is this significant? Most people get life insurance at one of these various different junctures, but they forget to reevaluate their needs. So it's important to do that. So you got married or you got a mortgage, all of a sudden you got life insurance, or you got life insurance after the birth of your first child. But it costs about $250,000 to raise a kid until age 18 nationally. You're all in New York. That's going to be an inflated number. Plus, that doesn't include college tuition. So even just having one additional kid can be the difference of $500,000 in life insurance needs. The general rule of thumb I like to use is $2 million is $100,000 a year for the next 20 years. So use that as a proxy to gauge what your life insurance needs are going to be. Now, the reverse is also true. As you get closer and closer to retirement, your 401k you're saving into your 401k, your mortgage is paid off, kids are out of the house, most of the tuition is done. Your needs actually goes back down over time. So at that point, it's no longer a need for life insurance. It's a want. I want to leave a legacy. I want to minimize the estate taxes for my beneficiaries and things of that nature. Rosanna, you're in the T&E space. Where do you see people leveraging life insurance in this context?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think we've been for the last almost 10 years at a place where estate taxes isn't something that really impacts most people because the thresholds are so high. So, roughly speaking, for estate taxes on a federal level, it's 13 million for an exemption for estate and gift taxes. And then if you're married, you can take each other's exemption. And New York is about 7 million. It goes up slightly every year for inflation. So because of that, life insurance, it used to be when the exemptions were much lower. Prior to 2010, there was a point where it was 1 million. And so it was much more common to have life insurance policies in place to have liquidity to pay estate taxes because more people had to worry about estate taxes. But now that's been less of the case, although we may see a change again in that in the end of 2025, the exemption amounts on the federal level are expected to go down. The law that put those in place was part of the Trump tax laws that are going to sunset. And so the expectation is that in 2026, the federal levels will probably go down to roughly about 7 million per person, which means that there may be more people who are worried about estate tax. And it comes up in different contexts for a family. A family may just not have a lot of liquidity. Let's say most of their their assets are in property, or maybe they have a family business that has a rental building. And if they end up having an estate tax, there may be no way to pay it unless they have to, sell the property. So that's when life insurance can be a very useful tool. And I think you mentioned the other, reason that it could be helpful is because somebody wants to leave some funds behind, a legacy. They may not have other ways to be able to leave that for their family. And, another additional context, which we haven't mentioned here, is that, you may have a child who's now an adult child, but they may have a disability or special needs, and you want to ensure that there's funds available for them. And that's probably what I see as the most common reason for families to have life insurance, even as their kids become adults, because they want to ensure that there's funds available to care for a loved one who needs some extra assistance.
Thank you, Yvonne.
I just want to point out real fast, there's some different questions happening in the chat. Someone asked Niraj if you could repeat the rule of thumb. I think when you said it was like 2 million, that's 100,000 a year.
Robin, I'm happy to do that. It's if you look at a $2 million term policy and the death benefit, when you break it down, it's $100,000 over the course of the next 20 years. That's what it's replacing in terms of your income. And the benefit is that it is tax-free. So you need to take that into consideration when you're comparing it to your salary. Your salary is taxable. But a lot of the times what we find is that people think, I have $1 million. I'm not trying to make my kids rich. That's what we hear a lot of. Even $2 million. You may not be trying to make them rich, but $100,000 does not go as far as it used to when you think about the lifestyle that they've gotten accustomed to. So that's why I use that as a proxy to just kind of put it into context as far as, do you have enough coverage or not,
And I've never really thought of it in the context of just covering estate taxes, Rosanna. That's a really great point. I'm glad that you brought that up. One other question in the chat was, can anyone recommend a government publication that analyzes the advantage of waiting to trigger Social Security until age 70?
Martha, if you could hang on, we have a couple slides. I don't know if what sources are at the bottom, so I don't remember where the publications came from, but we'll definitely touch upon that. And the best way to know the advantages of waiting is knowing exactly when you're going to pass away, which unfortunately none of us do. So without that information, it's always a guess, but there's definitely stats that show you, okay, assuming you have a long, healthy life, this is the break even. But we are going to touch upon that on, why it typically is going to make more sense for this audience to delay than other folks.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
I also remember, and I don't know if Social Security does this anymore, but I think it might be available on their website. They used to send everyone, you would get something in the mail every year saying if you retired at this age, this is, and it was a table showing that. And I haven't checked, but and maybe one of the resources you have later will have a link to it. But I believe their website might have that information as well, where you might be able to plug in an age and see what it would be like based on your income.
That's right, Rosanna. And as Mara pointed out, they stopped sending those out in the mail. I think if they do, it's every other year. So if you want it, you have to go to ssa.gov. If you have trouble remembering the website, it's backwards. So, but it's a good website. There's a lot of good information on there. You could find out a lot. It's scary how much they're going to know about you, because they're going to ask you, okay, which of these cars have you owned? Which house have you lived in? And you're like, whoa, you know a lot of stuff. But it's very helpful. It's not going to give you the break-even point, but you could see how much and how significant the benefits grow each year that you delay. It's like a 7 to 8% increase every year, plus cost of living. So last year, if you delayed it, and then all of a sudden, we had high inflation, people got a pretty substantial bump in their Social Security benefits. So there's definitely options, and the website will help you with that. So we spent a couple minutes talking about life insurance, but I think it's equally important to spend some time talking about disability and protecting your most valuable asset, which is your ability to earn an income. If you think about how much time you spent studying for the bar, going to law school, building your practice, et cetera, and how you got to this salary, Most people have insurance on their home, they have insurance on their car, they have insurance on their life, but are you protecting your income? So let's assume your salary is $500,000 and you earn 60% of that in terms of group benefits. So this is why it's important to look through your employer benefits. Most commonly, they're going to offer you 60%, which leaves you with $300,000. Now, if we're going to assume about a third for taxes, you're going to be left with about $200,000 because if it's a group benefit, it is going to be taxable. So what happens? Let's assume you've done your annual budget and it works out to be $20,000 per month that you're spending on your household between your mortgage, student loans, everything else, kids' activities, etc. Well, that means you're going to have to make a cut to your lifestyle in the tune of about 40 grand a year. So significant change to your lifestyle. Now, how do we address this? A few different ways. Number one, check if your employer allows you to pay for your own benefits. Why would I pay for a benefit that somebody else is paying for? If you pay for it yourself, the benefits are no longer taxable. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you could always look into getting a supplemental policy. A few things that you want to look at with the group benefits is 60% might be the percentage, but they might put a cap, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month. They may not include bonuses, so things of that nature. So you want to make sure that you're getting the nitty-gritty as far as what's covered and what is not. So let's kind of shift gears to long-term care planning.
Thanks, Niraj. I just want to jump in before we talk about long-term care regarding disability. One other important point on that comes up is that if you work for someone and your insurance is through your employer, that's great. But then if you change jobs and you've had a health issue, you might still be able to get insurance through your employer. But if you want to get an additional disability insurance to cover that gap, you may not be eligible. So it's one of those things that if you can do it before you get sick, you have a lot more options. And I know for any like solo practitioners and people who have their own businesses, it was the first thing that I did when I had a solo practice was to get disability insurance because there's no one there to cover you if you're not able to work.
Yeah, good point, Rosanna. And I just wanted to add for the solos in the room, we take it for granted as employees that, the employer paid for our disability and we always had it. But when you switch and you go off on your own, you don't think about the disability coverage, and it's important. So two things on that. Number one, it might be tempting to take the tax deduction and say, okay, this is a business write-off. If I worked for a firm, they would pay for this benefit. Legitimate, but keep in mind that depending on how you do that, it may make your benefits taxable. So it may be worth sacrificing the tax write-off in order to get the tax-free benefit. But number two, it's human nature to try to, or at least nature for business owners, and I'm not saying it's anybody on this call, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but business owners tend to try to minimize their income as much as possible. It's not uncommon to take as many deductions as possible. Keep in mind that if you're trying to get disability coverage, they're going to ask you for your W-2s, your 1099s and your business returns. So you might be putting yourself in a position where you're just not going to get the adequate coverage because on paper, your salary doesn't reflect what your true earnings could be. So again, this might not be applicable for everybody here, but it's something to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. So
long-term care, I want to sort of step back and just talk about, well, what does long-term care mean? This comes up in the context usually when people have either a medical illness that is progressive, something where they may be diagnosed with an illness where they're fine today, but they know sort of in the future they may need additional assistance, particularly with things such as activities of daily living, or they might have a crisis. They might have an accident, a traumatic brain injury, or so in those contexts, this can happen to people whether they're young or old, and it is often something that people don't think about unless they've had someone in their family who's gone through this experience, and they're usually astonished to find out that their health insurance, or if they have Medicare, that and they have a supplemental policy, that it doesn't cover the most expensive item that they may end up facing, which is nursing home care, or even just having some help in the home, which usually is unskilled care, but can be essential for people, you know, in order to be able to let them live independently at home, but with support. And so, as the slide shows, you know, 7 out of 10 people in the US will end up needing long-term care. And it can impact people, you know, mostly it does impact people who are older, but again, it can be someone who's younger, who has an accident, you know, and can need that kind of assistance.
I just want to add to this, you know, from a personal perspective. So, I'm the primary caregiver for my own mother, and she's tried to maintain her independence as long as possible, doesn't want to leave her house and things of that nature. But about 10 years ago, I encouraged her to take out a long-term care policy, and she fought me on it. You know, she didn't want to pay the premium. She's like, you're trying to send me to a nursing home, et cetera. And I kept trying to encourage her to understand that it's not nursing home insurance. It's nursing home avoidance insurance. You know, as Rosanna pointed out, it's going to have somebody come into the house to provide those benefits, to administer medication, to help her get in and out of bed, do the things that she probably doesn't want us to do. Now, as she's gotten older, her balance is off. You know, she's having trouble with certain activities, and we're sending her to an adult daycare, you know, during the day, and it's going to cover it. You know, she's no longer walking to the doctors or anything like that. You know, they're driving her, and it just gives me so much more peace of mind. When things she could maintain her independence. She could still continue to live in her own home and things of that nature. But when things get bad, she could live in our home, and we could have somebody else to give her that care without it being myself or my wife. So
yeah, that's a really, really important point that you bring up, is that this isn't about making sure that someone can afford a nursing home. I mean, most people, rightfully so, want to avoid, you know, having to go into a nursing facility. This is about giving people choice. And I find, for my clients, I find that people who have long-term care insurance generally are the ones who have a much easier path of independence as they get older, because they have that security, and it's a huge security. Now, the cost, and I'm sure Niraj, you can talk more about this, you know, the cost of long-term care insurance, and it's amazing your mom was able to get it when she was older, because it is.
Oh, she got it over 10 years ago. Well, you're right. Okay, she was still in her early 60s.
Yeah. I mean, I think the ideal age, they say, for people to get long-term care insurance is around 50. Is that right?
My general rule of thumb is everybody's got a pecking order of, you know, what is a priority. So think about what happens when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s. You're still paying down a mortgage. You're still putting your kids through college. You're still putting money into your 401k. Is there disposable income to put money towards a long-term care policy? If the answer is yes, then we add it to the list, even if you're in your 30s or 40s. If the answer is no, we get to it when we get to it, you know? So I've had a case where I presented it to a client, and then they said no for all the reasons we talked about. 6 months later, they call me, hey, can we revisit the long-term care thing? I said, what happened? Turns out their sister got cancer, and now all of a sudden it moved to the top of the list. So, you know, it is a matter of priority.
Right. Well, I would actually say there's also this new option, and probably you can also talk more about this as well, where you can get a life insurance policy that has a rider that allows you to use some of that benefit, death benefit, if you have a long-term care crisis. And actually, I mean, I'm gonna tell everyone that I ended up doing this for myself, because, you know, I have one child, and my partner is older than me, and I just think that it's really important to not create a situation where I have nothing in place for that kind of, and it's also a life insurance policy. So if you don't end up needing it, which is usually what people feel most, you know, the reason why people are most reluctant about long-term care insurance in the typical sense is that you pay this huge premium, but if you don't end up needing it, you just paid for it for all these years and there's nothing to get back. So I think the fact that there's now options in the market is important for people to explore based on their family context.
Yeah, I think more people are opting for these hybrid policies. The agreement I had with my mom, and by the way, she experienced a 65% rate increase along with a lot of other people that had these policies. The agreement was every year when the bill came, I get to hear her. I will listen to her complain about how expensive it is, and then she will pay it. That's the agreement we settled on, because it is very expensive. But as Rosanna pointed out, there are different alternatives that may or make sense at any age. So All right, let's, I know we're kind of falling behind schedule, so we'll try to talk a little bit faster. Roseanne, you want to talk about some of the costs?
Sure. So, I mean, we already touched a bit, on this, that obviously healthcare could be your second largest expense during retirement. And it doesn't, and that doesn't include long-term care. So I think that, pretty much sums up that, this is what, to the extent you're saving for this and looking for other, tools such as insurance to help, cover the gaps for this as you're getting older.
Now, look, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, this is part of what we were talking about before, is that, in general, women live longer, and one of the many roles that they take on in their life is being a caregiver to their parents. And often this is now happening in what we call the sandwich years. It's people are having children a little bit later, and then their parents are aging, and they find themselves taking care of small kids and their older parents at the same time. And a lot of my clients are, moms who are in that situation. And, basically, again, for the families where there's long-term care insurance, it's such a different trajectory of how the options that they can examine. But it's definitely a really important, component of thinking about, what can you get in place for your own family, so that they're not stuck in that situation one day.
So let's, a lot of the times people will think that they're going to be able to self-fund. And here's the, cost of self-funding for a long-term care event. Let's assume we had $1 million in our 401k. Think about this. Most of the time, retirees' biggest assets are their home and their 401k. Home is typically not something they want to sell in order to cover a long-term care expense. So you have $1 million portfolio, and let's assume that the cost of care is $200,000 a year. If you think this is unrealistic, look at your home state and see how much it actually costs. So to take to net the $200,000, we actually had to take $300,000 out to account for taxes. So somebody who was living off of this $1 million portfolio at 5% was generating $50,000 a year. One spouse needs care, we had to take 300, pay 100,000 to Uncle Sam, and left with 200. Now the portfolio is down to 700,000, and 5% of 700,000 is $35,000. That's after 1 year. Rinse and repeat one more time. Now we're down to 400,000, and the surviving spouse went from living off of $50,000 a year to living off of $20,000 a year. So you could see how quickly this erodes when there's long-term care involved. So these are the reasons. It doesn't mean insurance is the only option, but planning is required for these types of events, especially if you're very heavy in the long-term care, in the 401k sector. We see people using this not just as like a lot of wealthy folks will use this knowing well that they could afford long-term care, but they do this as a tax preservation strategy. So a lot of ways that you can minimize this. The question came up, Mara, you asked the question about somebody who could help with long-term care. If you're looking for that, we could certainly help you. That's something that we help with our clients with on a pretty consistent basis. So happy to help where we can. So as we talked about, delaying Social Security is a big opportunity, especially for women, because of the fact that there's going to be longevity. Again, maybe slowing down, taking on less cases, things of that nature could be pretty helpful, but it does have a meaningful impact on your overall retirement.
There was a question, I know that we're kind of trying to move along, but someone wanted an example, like an idea of what your mom was paying as a premium for her long-term care, I guess, just to have like a sense of.
Yeah, a long time ago, she was paying like $5,600. I think that's what it just came up to. Some of the more recent policies I've ran, for a single person, late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in the $7,500 to $7,500 a year range. There's a number of different factors. Are we getting a hybrid policy like Rosanna pointed out, in which case it could be dirt cheap to add, if you're getting a traditional long-term care policy, depending on age, depending on health condition, gender is going to play a part. So there's a number of different factors, but it's very much like home or auto insurance in the sense that you choose how much coverage you want. You choose your deductible, things of that nature. So you could adjust the premiums to fit your budget if, but they're not cheap. That's the bottom line. So Morgan, you want to talk?
Sure, absolutely. So the next two slides, we're just talking about sort of the different roles that women will fill, multiple roles, multiple responsibilities throughout the course of our lives, in the workplace, family roles, in the communities. It's really all we're talking about is that juggle. And I think we're all familiar with that. How do we juggle all of this? And in terms of work and life, obviously that's where this conversation picks up about just work-life balance. How can we have it all, and how can we juggle it all? And I think what's really important here is that we saw during the pandemic how impossible that task can really become, where we collectively saw that, you know, it resulted in this mass exodus of women from the workforce. 4 times the rate higher than men dropped out of the workforce. That was 865,000 women, compared with, you know, 216,000 men in the same age group leaving the workforce. And we have some unique financial considerations when we're looking at the roles of mothers versus the roles of fathers. And I think a lot of it, maybe, you know, it pertains to the numbers, but it also pertains to societal expectations, social expectations. You know, mothers are more likely to feel like they need to reduce their work hours, and that they can't necessarily give 100%, or they have to come up with unique solutions on their own without sort of social safety nets in place for us. We're sort of tasked with doing that ourselves. And I'm sure if a lot of you in attendance are attorneys, you have that same thing that I have going on, which is, you know, you do X amount of work during the day, you make it home, you can do dinner, you can do bath time, you can do bedtime, and then you log back in to do the rest of the, you know, hours and hours of work that you have to get done. So we're all trying to, you know, face that sort of juggle and struggle together.
Yeah, Laura, just a quick story on that. You know, during the start of the pandemic, you know, I used to work at an office 45 minutes away. So I used to come home late. By the time I got home, my son was getting ready for bed, didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time. I was, like many people, once the pandemic started and I was home, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break from 3 to 5. I'm going to take my kid to the park, spend time with him, get quality time that I would have otherwise missed, and then do exactly what you said. Nighttime, he's in bed, I'll turn the laptop back on. I was sharing this story with a friend who's works at a competitor, also in the financial services field, and she's like, wow, must be nice to be a dude. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, you do this, the perception is you're a good dad. I do this, people are like, why are you taking off during work hours? You know, so it hit me. She's 100% right. And I think the slide does a good job of illustrating that. There is definitely different perceptions of men and women doing the exact same thing at the workplace. So it's an important consideration that I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that's why I always like it when men are on these calls, because we don't always recognize that.
And I think to some degree, men in younger generations are really starting to pick up the slack. I see a lot of that with respect to divorces of younger millennials, and you know, men wanting to be more of a caretaker, or having fulfilled more of caretaking roles to their kids, wanting shared custody schedules, and you know, it can impact child support in different ways too when you have a parent who's actually an equal partner. Just like it can impact you in your own career, in your own marriage, if you're equally dividing that. But there are, you know, by and large, still these historic, you know, gender norms and roles and expectations, and you know, mothers are taking more time off after having children. They are taking more time off during the course of a year even. They are primarily the parent. I mean, there's so many stories of both mom and dad are listed on the call list for the school if there's an emergency, and mom can even say, call dad first. But who does the school administration call?
That happened to us.
Mom,
That happened to us.
So
my office is 3 minutes from my kid's school. We listed me first. My wife got the call.
Yep. And so, you know, there's this perception too that women are not as dedicated because then they are taking this time off, and they're saying the stats are showing that women are saying this is negatively impacting their jobs. The role of parent, I mean, look, the average cost of raising a child is astronomical. And I've tried to look at this number in a lot of different ways. There's some great breakdowns of what all of these different expenses are that go into raising a child. And then even though that number is high, middle income parents are still spending more than that on our kids, because obviously we want them to have the best, or we want to try to go above and beyond and give them everything that we thought we wanted or didn't have. And so it can just become incredibly expensive. And it's even more so, it becomes very difficult if you end up in a two-family home, in a split home, in a divorce setting. But the largest expense obviously associated with raising a child was housing, followed by food, and then childcare. Don't even get me started on how expensive childcare can be, because it is very outrageous here, especially in New York. But these numbers didn't even take into account the cost of education. Finally, let's see, moving on, your role as partner. You know, there's such a great book, Fair Play, and there's a series of like cards that go along with it. You can order this to try to help in terms of partnership. What makes a great partnership? What makes a great marriage? How do you fulfill that? And how can you be supportive of one another? And I feel like this is a big topic. I feel like there's a big shift that's happening between what you see in the boomer generations and what you're seeing in younger generations. And I see it around, especially when it comes to prenups that I'm doing for younger couples, because they are actively having this conversation. And I think that's what's really critical for women, is to have this kind of conversation, have the financial conversation with your partner, so that you both have access to all the same information, that you're both aware. None of us can afford to go into this blind without information, and just trust that it's going to be okay, if, and the other person is going to handle it, because there are too many other life events, divorce especially included, that can happen that will take you by surprise if you're not aware of what's going on with the finances.
I would just add one thing regarding the previous slide regarding partner. It's also an important consideration when Morgan talks about, if a family, splits up, there is economic, but there's also economic decisions that come with a decision to decide whether to get married, and Social Security benefits, especially as a person gets older. There may be considerations, other benefits that are based on both. If you're married, they're based on both of the person's resources and assets and income, and also taxes, estate taxes. There are certain benefits you get from being married that you don't get when you're not married. So those are all just part of the big picture in planning, as people get older and have different considerations.
I don't know if we should end it here. It's at 1 o'clock. I'm okay to stay on a few more minutes if everybody else is, just to kind of keep the conversation going. Morgan, Rosanna, you guys have a couple more minutes as well?
Sure, absolutely.
Cool. I'm just going to add one thing to this slide as well, if you don't mind. So raise your hand, your virtual hand, if you met your spouse in law school. And if one of you could tell me if there are people raising their hand, there's always at least one. And I bring this up because I'm going to pitch a question to you, Morgan. Well, what do you see is the number one reason that people typically divorce or get divorced or lead down that path?
I mean, I think the number one thing that people typically are fighting, and I think studies show this, they fight most about financial issues. And financial infidelity can be just as devastating as sexual infidelity, because it's secret accounts or secret spending or things that really strike at the heart of the trust in the relationship, and then financially can just devastate both sides. and take someone completely unaware. So it's a serious problem, and definitely a big, I would say one of the top, if not the top issues creating divorce.
I agree. And, you know, I knew when we first got married, I told my wife we're going to hire a financial advisor, and she looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, you know, I understand the profession. I understand that no matter what, the advice was never coming from a financial advisor. The advice was coming from a husband. And that's a very different dynamic. So anybody raise their hand for meeting their partner in law school? Can anybody tell me? I can't see the reactions for some reason on my view.
I don't see
No?
anyone, but I don't know. I don't know if I missed the window.
Okay, so I asked the question because a lot of the times we'll have a husband and wife come in, or, you know, a couple come in, and there's one person who says, my parents paid for my law school education, and I think it's our responsibility to do the same for our kids. And then the other spouse will say, well, I hustled, I went to night school, I worked during the day, it taught me the value of my education, and I'm not sacrificing my own retirement to give them, you know, pay for their graduate school. Neither partner's right, neither partner's wrong. But if they're on different pages, this could be a hot button issue. So it's important to make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page with these topics. Otherwise, it's unfortunately going to be the case where they're going to come into Morgan's office. So definitely something to think about.
So I mean, we kind of touched on a little bit, you know, already about on this topic about, you know, being having your parents being the caregiver for your parents. I mean, I would say the number one thing that I find with my clients is that if their parents have some legal framework in place, as far as you know, power of attorney and a will and all these other things, it really helps kind of move that conversation along, because the child, you know, adult child who needs to be there to support their parent has the structures to be able to kind of do that, especially if an emergency comes up. It's so much worse when those things are not in place and the family is in a crisis, and the adult child is, you know, has young kids and also trying to navigate that situation. And there are, I mean, I think in the chat we have some examples, you know, yes, New York City is pretty amazing when it comes to, you know, some options for being able to use government benefits to support long-term care costs. And, you know, it's not an easy ride, and there is planning, legal planning that has to go in to be, for most people to be eligible for that. But it's also, you know, it's a limited resource, and it's becoming more and more limited. In other states, it's even more limited. Home care is generally not available in a lot of other states, but New York does have a home care program through its Medicaid benefits. But we have seen it over the last year how much harder it is for people to access it. So it's, you know, we don't know whether it'll be here when we get older, to be quite honest, but we'll see.
And I think we already touched on divorce a little bit and Social Security. As Niraj has mentioned, it's in women's best interest usually to delay Social Security, especially higher earners in the household. And divorce will impact Social Security, or it can. I mean, you can, if you do not get remarried and you have been married for 10 years before your divorce, you can take against what your spouse's share would be. And it doesn't reduce, right now, this is per the Social Security Administration, it doesn't reduce how much your spouse gets. But if your spouse is set to get $4,000 a month upon retirement, and you're set to get only $1,000, you can take up to the $2,000 and increase how much you're taking, provided you don't get remarried after the divorce, and also provided you were married for 10 years or more. So that's just a benefit that is coming through Social Security. But also then there are issues to consider with respect to retirement planning. You know, on the divorce, your accounts are going to be divided. The marital shares of accounts are likely going to be divided. And then it's almost like the Great Reset. You know, how much do you have then? How much more do you need to compensate in other areas? How do you restructure your life? And having a great financial planner at that time can be really critical to getting that financial clarity that you need for your specific situation.
As much as I really want to spend some time talking about Social Security, I don't think we have it, but I do think that this is an interesting point. Less than 1% of benefits are paid towards survivor spouses compared to 12% for women. So this goes to show like women are the ones that really do end up getting the short end of the stick with regards to Social Security. So a couple ways that we address this, especially with this particular group, is consider delaying. Unless there's some major health reasons, there's a good chance, and every case is unique, so I'm more than happy to go over them with you, your situation individually, but there's a good chance that it's probably going to make more sense for you to delay as the primary earner. Even if you're the secondary earner, depending on your level, it might make sense, especially when we take the longevity into consideration. So somebody was asking for a graphical representation. Don't know the source here, but let's see if we could see what it is on the bottom. This is the Social Security Administration, it looks like. So hopefully this does help from the perspective of when's the break-even point based on age and things of that nature. So like I said, for a lot of people, 70 is going to be the magic age to take it, because that's when you're going to get the most benefit. After that, it doesn't really make sense to continue to delay. Morgan kind of talked about the benefits as a divorced person. You know, you are able to collect up to 50% of their ex-spouse's benefits or your own. So.
So if a person faces losing a spouse, you know, there's obviously some important considerations. One, you know, that I would just say is that it's amazing how often people forget to put a beneficiary designation in their retirement accounts. And I would just, you know, remind everyone that this is a primary, you know, thing to do to make sure that, you know, if you're married and your spouse is listed as your primary, because it makes it much more straightforward. It can roll over into an inherited, you know, retirement account. They can stretch it over their lifetime, and you can avoid probate. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to spend legal fees. You have access to those funds right away. And often, like when, you know, I meet with clients, a big part of what we're talking about is how do you structure your planning so that, you know, if your spouse passes away or if you pass away, you know, how do you get funds quickly to people that may need it? And in a situation where you're married and you know, if your spouse depends or you depend on your spouse's income, that's an important piece of it, you know. And there definitely are ways that like your retirement account, which can very quickly pass over to you as long as you're listed as a beneficiary on that account.
So I don't know how many people are familiar with QCDs. Long story short of this is that it's a tax efficient strategy for those that are charitably inclined and over the age of 70 and a half. A lot of the times people are no longer able to get a tax deduction for their contributions to the charity of their choice due to the new tax law changes. They're no longer itemizing, they're taking a standard deduction. While this won't help you get a tax deduction for contributing to a charity or donating to a charity, what it will do is help lower your taxable income. So hypothetically, if you had a required minimum distribution of $10,000, which you were donating to charity, what happens? You pull $10,000 out, you declare taxes on that. So you have to pay, let's call it 20% or $2,000, and then you donate $8,000 to charity. By donating your RMD directly to the charity, take the $10,000, you never take possession of it and give it directly to the charity, you do not have to pay the taxes on that $2,000. So you lowered your taxable income and the charity still got $10,000. So there's just different strategies that you could do to minimize your overall, you know, your overall tax liability from an income tax perspective, not necessarily on a, you know, the tax deduction side.
And Niraj, I think this is our last slide, and Ernesto has another meeting to attend to.
We're done.
So we need to wrap it up.
I think it's great that we went over it. It means that there was such good discussion. So thank you all for.
And Ernesto, I don't know, is there a way that this recording can be shared with the attendees or the chat can be shared with the attendees? It's a very vigorous chat and a lot of people are sort of commenting or asking that.
Yes, absolutely. So I did respond to one of the attendees. The program will be available later this week on the Women in Law section's webpage under the Program Archives tab. and we can follow up with the attendees present today to send the link over when it is ready. And I believe there is a report that we can run through Zoom to attach the chat as well for reference for all the resources shared during today's program.
Yeah, and if anybody ever, if you belong to a different, not that there are a better bar associations, but different bar association, or if you wanted a presentation like this at your law firm, we're happy to do this there as well. So I'm sure that we could recreate it in your hometown. So
Thank you so much, Niraj.
you all.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. This was great. I loved the discussion. That was great. So I appreciate it.
Yes, and
Thank you all.
Oh, go ahead, Laura. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, just thanking the panelists and all of the attendees. Thanks very much.
I would like to echo Laura's sentiment. Thank you, Niraj, Rosanna, and Morgan for a fantastic and very informational program. This does conclude our webinar, so please make sure to return to your My Learning dashboard and complete the course evaluation. Thank you for choosing New York State Bar Association programs, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You all.